Ladies and gentlemen, this is Saeed David Farman. We're live, Alchemy Event, Cosmic Initiation. We have a great guest in Egypt, Dr. Schoch, Dr. Robert Schoch. Good evening, Dr. Schoch. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. I'm pleased to be on Skype with you from Cairo.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. Our audience always love your Facebook. We blog about your research and they follow and your expeditions to Egypt and Turkey and they follow your writings and books and you name it, your expeditions. And tell us about what's going on in Egypt or anything else you'd like to add.
Well, I've been really pleased to be here in Egypt on on this historic day, the 21st of December 2012, that so many of us have been, I'll say, looking forward to. And nothing, we've survived. The world hasn't ended, which is good.
Yeah,
But if it was going to end, I mean, why not be in Cairo? Why not be with the Sphinx, which I've done so much work with? So
that's right.
we've been in Egypt got here a couple of days ago. We visited Plateau briefly today. Unfortunately, the Egyptian government closed off the Great Pyramid and closed access to a lot of areas because I think they were trying to, be concerned about crowd control,
That's right.
which I can understand. But it's been very exciting being here. So we visited the plateau. I got to see the Sphinx briefly. We'll go back there more. But of course, I've been working on the Sphinx for over 20 years now. And today we went to Dashur, where the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid are found, and had a really nice time there. It was quite empty. And we also went to Saqqara with the famous Step Pyramid and spent time there. So it's been a very, very positive, very good day.
What,
And
what
I
was,
feel
uh, I'm
good
sorry to
energy
interrupt you.
here.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. What was the first name, the Red Pyramid? You said Dashmore?
Yeah, the Red Pyramid, sometimes known as the North Pyramid at Dashur.
Dashur.
And yeah, at the Dashur Plateau, which is not that far away from Cairo, about a 40-minute drive. And what's interesting about the Red Pyramid, it's also known as the North Pyramid of Snufru. And what is interesting about it is this is a pyramid that, according to classical Egyptologists, is older than the Great Pyramid. That's number one. But what's really important about it is when you go in it, and I was showing people this today, you go into it, you go through one chamber, that's fine. It looks like a dynastic chamber. You go through another chamber, that's fine. It looks like a dynastic chamber. But then you go into the third and final chamber, and what you find there is this incredible megalithic substructure, and then above it very clearly is dynastic material that's been added onto it about 2500 BC. And I believe this is just further confirmation of this older period in the history of Egypt, in the history of the world, in civilization. And what you have, I strongly believe, especially after studying it again today, is in the North Pyramid, you have a very, very ancient structure. And the dynastic Egyptians, almost 5,000 years ago, acknowledged this, and they actually built the pyramid over this much more ancient structure to protect it, I believe, to preserve it. So this, to me, is just one more piece of evidence of civilization going back much earlier than traditional archaeologists and historians and Egyptologists will admit.
May I ask you, the material was granite inside the Red Pyramid, or what was it?
It's mostly limestone inside the Red Pyramid. And in fact, this older structure is limestone, but this massive megalithic scale architecture, which is incompatible with the rest of the pyramid. And what we're finding is that this older civilization, which I believe now we can date back to the end of the last ice age, was working primarily with limestone. For whatever reason, they like limestone in many cases. We find that the Sphinx, the original body of the Sphinx, was carved out of limestone, which is the bedrock at Giza. They built the Sphinx temple out of the limestone blocks they quarried when they carved out the body of the Sphinx. And then we have the site I was just talking about at the Dashur, the North Pyramid, and that older structure inside is limestone and very exciting. And we were talking about before we came on the air, I've been doing a lot of work in Turkey recently and taking people to Turkey on the tours. And there we have Göbekli Tepe, this incredible site in southeastern Turkey, which is being excavated by Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute, and his dating, which I've discussed with him at length, it's based on radiocarbon, it's based on stratigraphy, all kinds of very good hard science. This site goes back to 9 to 10,000 BC, which is just incredible. And there they are also carving megalithic limestone monuments, beautifully carved with beautiful carvings on them of different animals. Some of the pillars are actually humanoid. They have arms, they have belts and loincloths. So incredible. But apparently this early civilization that we've been looking at are these early aspects. They liked limestone. And limestone, I think, has a lot of properties. That's a very dense rock. It's very solid. It withstands, the time and the elements very well. It's also accessible, and people could work it. And actually, when you look at limestone, it's sort of counterintuitive, but in some cases, limestone, it's not harder than granite, softer than granite, but under certain conditions, it will last longer because granite, as igneous rock, actually spalls and peels off. So they may have known what they were doing, picking limestone.
Do you believe the Sphinx could be going back to time of Atlantis, 25,000 years?
No, I would, okay, well, you said Atlantis?
Yes, yes.
Atlantis. Yeah, actually, I take Plato because Plato, in my opinion, is the best authority on Atlantis that we have from ancient times. And Plato recounted the legends, and they're more than legends to me. To me, they were really history that he got through his ancestor who had visited Egypt in about 600 BC, and the ancient Egyptian priests had told him about Atlantis and what happened to Atlantis with the high civilization of Atlantis, how Atlantis was destroyed. And when you read Plato and you take him seriously at face value and you convert his chronology into our modern chronology, he puts the destruction of Atlantis, so the end of Atlantis, at about 9600 BC. And this is almost precisely the age of Göbekli Tepe, almost precisely the age of the dating, the modern geological dating of the end of the last ice age. And I now feel comfortable with the oldest portion of the Sphinx also potentially dating back to this very early period. So I think all of this is coming together. I actually talk about this in my new book, Forgotten Civilization. And I think all the evidence is now indicating that at the end of the last ice age, about 9,700 BC is my best, the best data, the best geological data puts about 9,700 BC, that you had high civilization that underwent a major catastrophe, just as Plato talked about.
That means Egyptians either were in Atlantis or they landed from another planet or another continent into Atlantis and made the structures around the Sphinx.
Well, what Plato are, well, different people, it's sort of where do you cut the line for Atlantis? Thinking of the Plato's concept of Atlantis, Atlantis existed not in Egypt, but people argue where was the exact geographic location of it, but my point is that Plato had dated Atlantis, the destruction of Atlantis, cataclysmic destruction of Atlantis, to about 97, 96, 9500 BC, somewhere in that range. And a lot of people believe that Atlanteans are, those that inherited from Atlantis trying to escape, spread out to different parts of the world. Edgar Cayce, for instance, a great American psychic, talked about this. And one place where they believe they may have escaped to was what we now call Egypt. And that dynastic Egypt, thousands of years later, arose, re-emerged, in part based on this foundation. And I think what we're finding now with good hard geology and archaeology and the scientific evidence is that there was an early civilization at the date that Plato places Atlantis, that it was destroyed cataclysmically. We'll call it a dark age. I believe, we could think in terms of a dark age lasting for thousands of years, and then civilization re-emerged. And this is what we see with the essentially instantaneous appearance of a very advanced civilization in Egypt that we call dynastic Egypt about 5,000 years ago. But it didn't just spring out of nowhere. It was a rebirth of civilization that had occurred thousands of years earlier.
And what a Sphinx means to you as a researcher? Why was it built, or what does it represent?
Well, I think that the Sphinx was not originally a Sphinx. The Sphinx is, as we see it now, is a lion's body with the head of a human. But one of the first things I noticed when I went to Egypt, and this was over 20 years ago when I first began studying the Sphinx, was that the head is much too small for the body. And what this means, and when I've looked at it and I've walked on the back of the Sphinx, I've studied it closely from a geological perspective, I believe that the head is newer. It had a much larger head originally. The head has been recarved because it was heavily weathered and it was heavily eroded over a period of over 10,000 years, I believe, or somewhere in that range. And to repair the Sphinx in dynastic times, 2,500 BC, what they did with the head is they had this big head that was badly damaged, badly eroded, so they just carved it away and made a smaller head. So right now, if you look at the Sphinx, and everyone that I've pointed this out to agrees, the head is too small for the body. The body itself is also highly eroded, but to repair it 5,000 years ago, they took little limestone blocks and sort of filled it in and tried to fill it in, and you can see that to this day. So getting back to the Sphinx, I think originally it was a lion, a male lion, and this ties in with the age of Leo, and all the evidence is now pointing to the lion, which we now call a Sphinx, having originally been carved in the age of Leo. And in the age of Leo, that lion, which we now call the Sphinx, it sits due east. It was watching the sun, if you would, rise on the vernal equinox in the constellation of Leo. So it was watching itself rise on the vernal equinox. And I now think that there's a very strong argument from the dating, from the stylistically, from the iconography of it, that this all fits together, that originally it was a male lion reflecting the constellation of Leo in the sky. And then we get other astronomical and astrological correlations on the Giza Plateau. So I think it's not surprising that the Sphinx is part of that.
Do you believe the ancient pharaohs, they changed the head of the Sphinx and they made a new one for themselves?
Yeah, I think that they changed the head of the Sphinx and they made a new one for themselves, but it's not clear what pharaoh or any pharaoh that it represents. In fact, when you look at the modern head of the Sphinx, when I say the modern head, the head that we now see, which is clearly over 4,000 years old, but a pharaonic head, that head, some people used to argue that it was Khafre, or the variously called Chephren, the pharaoh Chephren or Khafre. But it's very clear now, we've been able to demonstrate that. A fellow named Frank Domingo, a forensic police officer, now retired with the New York police, he did a clear analysis of the face of the Sphinx compared to statues of the pharaoh Khafre. It's not that pharaoh. In fact, I don't believe we can at this point match it to any pharaoh. So it's more a dynastic Egyptian head, which is maybe meant to be representative of more the human element, if you would, without being a specific person. I think that's still an open question. One thing that's very interesting about that head is that it seems to have a lot of African features. We could call them African features or more southern features, which would suggest, and I think it suggests, and other people have suggested to me, that this is a possibility that it represents a recarving of the head, but in very, very early dynastic times when there was a strong, we'll call it southern element that was in force in Egypt, that there was a very strong element from what is now called Upper Egypt, but the southern portion of Egypt, which is more African ethnically.
The pyramids itself, do you think was a power generator? Some people believe. Do you think we for sure we know it was not a burial chamber? Some
Yeah, it
people,
was definitely not a tomb.
yeah. And do you think was the king's chamber and the sarcophagus was built for ascension or something to do with Orion going, coming back, teleportation? Do you believe? What do you think the pyramid was built for?
I think actually the pyramid is built as a multi-purpose device, if you would. You don't build something like that, in my opinion, just for one purpose. I actually think that it had several different purposes, maybe different purposes at different periods in time. The pyramid, let me back up. The pyramid, as we see it, in my assessment, based on my analysis of it, was not all built at one time. I believe that there was what I call the sacred mound. There is a natural mound, rock mound, under the Great Pyramid. It's very clear that that's part was incorporated into the pyramid, that that's part of what we now call the Great Pyramid. To build a structure on a mound like that is actually not easy. Normally, from an engineering point of view, it's easier to just wipe the mound out to make a nice flat surface and then start from that, rather than work with that difficult topography. But I think that mound was very important to the Egyptians. There is underneath the pyramid, well deep into the bedrock, 100 feet or more into the bedrock, there's what's known as a subterranean chamber. And I believe that the descending passage down to the subterranean chamber probably is the first structure of what we now call the Great Pyramid. And that may have been used for some kind of psychical purposes, for enhancing consciousness. People to this day, I was just talking to someone, I think it was yesterday, that I know. He was talking about how he was allowed to go down to the subterranean chamber. I've been there numerous times, and he was feeling incredibly sick, incredibly weak. He had caught something. He's been in Egypt, I think, for a week or more. He had caught something that was really troubling him. He goes down there, and all of a sudden, he's totally re-energized. He's totally, essentially healed from it, and he could just feel this very powerful force. And, one might say, well, that's sort of crazy and that's sort of nonsensical if one's never experienced it. I've been down there too, and I admit I've experienced that too. So I think there's something that really affects human physiology, consciousness, mental states when you go down to the subterranean chamber. Now, I think that Egyptians built upon that, so they started building the pyramid up over that to protect it. They then had the what's now known as the ascending passage, the grand gallery. So I think this was used for the same type of enhancement purposes. I also think there's a very strong argument. At one point, the pyramid was not, as we see it now, was about half as high, so it formed a platform with the grand gallery open to the sky, and it was being used for astronomical purposes to make very precise astronomical measurements. Why? I think primarily for what we now call astrology. The ancients in general, the ancient Egyptians in particular, were very interested in astrology, as were all astronomers right up until a few hundred years ago. Even Galileo and Copernicus and Kepler, they all were very interested in astrology. In fact, Kepler was primarily Kepler, the great Kepler of the early 17th century, who figured out elliptical orbits, considered a great scientist by modern scientists and modern astronomers. He was primarily an astrologer. And I think that this ties in with the purpose of the Great Pyramid. Another purpose of the Great Pyramid, I believe, was for initiation rituals, and it was used for various initiations. And there's ancient records of it being used for that. So I think it was a multi-purpose structure, and probably other purposes, some of which we don't even quite understand to this day. One thing it was not was a tomb. Another suggestion, another thing I'll throw in here is that a lot of people have suggested that in the Great Pyramid, on top of everything else, you have basic measurements encoded. So it was a repository of basic measurements, basic mathematical information, basic relationships, basic measurements, including everything from basic units of measure to information about the Earth, and the dimensions of the Earth are encoded into the Great Pyramid. So really, to me, a multifunctional but very sophisticated structure.
Also, we do different practices in our groups, and one time I had a might sound funny to you, but one time I had a time travel. Was the only time actually. I just dropped to a time zone in Egypt. The pyramid was all white, shining white, with the eye of Ra on the one side of it. It was very visible, and it was so white and shiny. It was glowing from miles away, and as I was right at the entrance, it was guarded by some alien entities. That the ones they're like jackal, the tall ones. That they were real reptilians. That they had these long. This is what actually I'm experiencing as in time travel, and as I was wondering, getting permission to enter, they would not let me in. And after a while, that they let me in with these guards, and it was to me it was a temple, in a very sacred place that nobody was allowed to enter,
Mm.
not even very high priest, where only few people were allowed to enter, and whatever reason they had in there or whatever practices they were doing, there were some ET races involved with them, and they were doing some experiments on the planet here. That is, the pyramid was. I did not see any sphinx at my vision or the time travel, but what I remember basically, the whole pyramid was white and shiny with the eye of Ra right on it, and that was something that it was so like it was like movies to me. And then those aliens
Oh,
with those big rods and big the they were defending the
yeah.
pyramid. That was something very unusual, and it was very scary to me in the meantime, because they did not want me in there or allowed me in there. But for a few minutes, I was traveling back and forth, so that was my vision, and it was very interesting. So, coming back to asking you about what are you doing right now in Egypt? What's your research at this very trip?
Well, really, what I'm trying to do is continue the research both on looking for more evidence for the civilization, we'll call it before civilization, as I've been doing in Turkey also. So that's number one. And I wanted to mention that I'll be doing, I don't know if I said that yet, but I'll be doing another trip to Turkey in June, and I'm very excited about that. So these tie right together, looking for evidence for that not even looking for evidence for civilization, but more evidence now for civilization at the beginning of uh, at the end of the last ice age,
Do you
before
have the permission
modern
to
civilization.
dig in Turkey, correct?
Well, I have permission to study things in Turkey, yeah, and that ties in with permissions right now, getting back to Egypt. What something that we're trying to do, and I'll be meeting with various high government officials and whatnot in Egypt and people with connections. Now that we have a new regime in Egypt, of course, everyone knows about the Mubarak regime being ousted, and he's now gone, and it's a new regime, and I'm finding it very friendly. It's very safe here in Egypt, despite what American television and other television wants to say. I'm finding the people incredibly friendly. We've had absolutely no problems. In fact, it's been very welcoming. But something I'm hoping is that we can include within that welcome is a chance, an opportunity to continue the research in Egypt that was cut off under the old regime. And I have a number of projects in mind. One thing which is obvious, and we'll see how what we can do. For instance, back in the 1990s, Thomas DeBakey, the geophysicist, and myself, I have a PhD in geology and geophysics, we found under the left paw of the Sphinx a major chamber, an artificial chamber. And this was something that I was informed after the fact that Edgar Casey had predicted this, and that this would be a hall of records for Atlantis, which now doesn't seem so crazy to me, given where my research has gone. And so I'd like to be able to get into that chamber. This is something I've wanted to do for 20 some years now, and I'm
Yeah,
hoping with a new
we've been
regime.
following that on
Yeah,
internet, and
so I'm hope.
do you think they will allow you to dig under the POW?
I don't know. I don't know, but I just throw this out because this is clearly something I've been talking about wanting to do for a long time. There are places in Abydos and middle and southern Egypt, Abydos and Hawara. There are other places where I'd like to go to be able to do research. I'd like to do more geophysics, for instance, because that's the first step to see what's underneath the sand to get there. So there's a lot of exciting things that we have never been able to explore and discover in Egypt. And I'm hoping that with the new regime, the new authorities, a new mindset, especially with 2012 now, and now I do believe we're going into a new period.
Were you? I'm
I'm
sorry.
hoping that we'll have breakthroughs. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Were you involved with the Polish group for Hawara? You were with them when they a few years back uh, they found.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to be meeting with representatives of that group on this trip. I'm scheduled to meet with them, and that's something that, yeah, we're very involved with. So I'll be happy to maybe get back to you after the trip and let you know how it went.
And may I ask you, last trip, I heard they found the underground, the cities were built under Hawara, which Plato, what Plato called it, I don't know, I forgot, but
A
that's
labyrinth, a labyrinth?
the labyrinth of,
Yes, yes.
and can you tell us anything about that findings or what happened?
Well, I have no doubt looking at the data I've been shown, and I'll be going to Hawara on this trip. So in about, I think, about around the new year, we'll be going to Hawara, and we want to look into this further, meet with some of the people who are collecting that data. I've been there before looking at this, and I'm convinced that yes, there's something under there near the pyramid at Hawara. And this sure sounds like the fabled labyrinth. It looks like the type of structure that was being described. And that, yes, this needs to be explored further, and this could be very critical. So I'm very
I
excited about it.
I was told off the records that they were asked to leave because they found a big city under the labyrinth, and there were artifacts there that Dr. Hawass and Egyptians didn't want international. Actually, I was told back then that they're going to close this off until year 2012, and this is amazing that they're letting them in 2012. And this is something.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
I think it's really exciting. I think it's really exciting, really amazing. And I think what is allowing it to happen is that there's now a new regime in Egypt. There's now a new people in charge in Egypt.
It
So
could
the
be.
old
It could be
guard is no
also.
longer handling it.
It could be also the Americans didn't want us to find something that is in
I think
labyrinth,
so.
and it could be also some international espionage that they even
Yeah,
yeah, something really that would change the humanity's future is as
yeah.
heredity.
I can't disagree with you. I can't disagree with you. I mean, there could be something going on there because whatever we find, I think it has the potential to really change things,
And may I ask
change
you
how we.
what Plato wrote about labyrinth?
He actually talks about it, and other ancient authorities talk about it as essentially a hall of records, what we would now call a hall of records, a place where knowledge was stored, where knowledge was kept. And this was very, very ancient knowledge. This was ancient to the ancient Egyptians. So we're talking ancient Egyptians thousands of years ago. And for them, this was knowledge from a higher civilization. Again, as I was talking about before, an earlier civilization that they revered that went back thousands of years earlier than them. And one suggestion is that that civilization went through a major catastrophe on Earth, major Earth changes. And we know, I'm a geologist, I know that the Earth, this is basic geology, goes through periods of major change. It's not always nice and simple and quiet on the surface of the Earth. There are major changes. The last major change was the end of the last ice age. And I talk about this in my new book, Forgotten Civilization. I actually have a copy of it here. I don't know if
Oh,
you can
how
see that.
wonderful! Yeah, I've seen the
Yeah,
front.
yeah, isn't that great? I love the cover. My wife Katie actually designed the cover. That's a picture of the Sphinx, my beloved Sphinx,
Very nice.
which I took on a previous
Is
trip.
it on Amazon?
Took
Is it
that.
sold on Amazon?
It's sold on Amazon, absolutely.
Oh,
People
okay.
should buy it on Amazon, and to get the best experience, buy the book, read it, and then come on a trip with me.
Definitely.
I'm sure
Yeah, definitely. We would love
people
to join
doing
you.
it.
Join you in Turkey in June if we raise some
Yeah,
money, or maybe some of the audience would donate to Alchemy Event. I would like to take a group with Dr.
that would be
Schoch.
excellent.
Oh, thank you.
That would be excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, we would like to arrange the trip. If somebody help us out, and on the website you can donate unlimited amount. We can do more projects, especially with Dr. Schoch and his Egyptian and Turkish expeditions. And Dr. Schoch, please keep us informed about the Hawara. Is very interesting. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And can I say, I'd like people to, so they know where to find things, they can find my book on Amazon. Also, they should go to my website. And there they will find links to the book. They will find links to the trips that I'm working on and putting together. And I love taking people, with me to see these sites. And I think this is so important to publicize them, to get people to see them. I hope that you can come. But my website is www.robertschoch.com. And let me spell it because people don't always know how to spell my name correctly. My last name is spelled Schoch, Schoch. So it's www.robert, ROBERTSCHOCH, altogether.com. So www.robertschoch.com.
And may I ask you how many books you've written, Doctor?
How many books? What?
Have you
I've
written?
written?
Yeah.
I don't know, about a dozen or so, somewhere that it depends, because some of them are academic, some of them are, specialized for other fellow scientists, some are for the, I'll call it the more general public. Some I try to combine both of it. I've been getting very nice comments about Forgotten Civilization recently, that, people are really enjoying it. They like the way it reads. They find it a really good read, but it also contains real science, because I am a scientist, and that's what I am first and foremost.
Are you still
And
teaching at? Are you still teaching at University of
I'm teaching at,
Boston?
yeah, I'm teaching at Boston University. I teach at Boston University full time. I've been teaching there since 1984, believe it or not. So I'm ensconced in academia, although I have to admit some of my fellow academics get a little upset because I tend to follow the data where it takes me rather than just go with the flow and go with the what everyone else wants to hear in academia.
Yeah,
I talk
one
about this
thing, one
in
thing,
civilization.
one thing good about you, you don't, you have your own mindset and your own ideology. That's unique and wonderful to hear something that is not a norm of everybody else, and you bring a lot of good things to the table. And what do you teach at the Boston University?
I teach science. When it comes right down to it, I teach science. And what I mean by that is I teach primarily undergraduate courses. And many of these undergraduates, when they come and they take my course, they're not interested in science particularly. They're wonderful students. I love the students at Boston University, but many of them are majors in totally different fields. They have to take a required science course as part of the requirements for college. And so I teach them science, and I include in that whatever, I don't want to say whatever I feel like including, but what I think is important, what I think is foundational for them. So I really like doing this, and getting the new, fresh college students. And I find that many of them are much more open, much more questioning, of course, than when you have had students that have already been heavily indoctrinated in the status quo. So
How do
I'm
you,
trying to do my best to
how do
affect
you,
the new generation in a positive way.
definitely, yeah. How do you relate, how do you compare, should I ask you, Havara is more important or Turkish expedition?
Say that again?
May I ask you,
Turkish expedition?
the Turkish expedition
Turkish?
is more important or expedition in Havara?
That's a hard one. I mean, I love both places. But what I would say right now, what has been very important to me, and I mean, you're asking, it's like asking a parent to compare their two children,
Yeah.
Egypt versus Turkey. That's not fair.
Exactly.
They're both important. But right now, I'm excited about both, and I'm always excited about the next trip. And the next trip is to Turkey, going back to see the sites in Turkey and Göbekli Tepe in particular, but also other sites. For instance, underground cities in Turkey, which are just absolutely incredible and tie in with this story that I'm developing. Because how did some of these people survive, and how did they survive? There were these huge catastrophes on Earth, and I think we see the evidence in Turkey that there's these traditions of going underground to escape. So that's something we explore also, and I'm
Is
studying
that
in
near
Turkey.
Ankara or where is it near? Close to what city?
Oh, Cappadocia. That a lot of that is actually it's sort of central, and Konya, that area.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's great area. And Turkey, I just want to mention, Turkey is just such an incredible country. It's got so much history, so much diversity, and really pushes back, as I said, the origins of civilization, as does Egypt. But it also has essentially a complete record of what happened since then. So, I mean, yeah, if you really want to understand the broad expanse of history and the origins of where we came from as a civilized society, and how it developed Turkey is a wonderful place to
And
discover that.
the
It's
the
the place.
Turkish expedition in June, other than you or few Turkish scientists, archaeologists, who else is involved, and what is the exact plan?
Oh, well, anyone who would like to come, because I believe in making these open to everyone, is welcome. And the plan is we'll actually be traveling through Turkey. We start in Istanbul, so we meet in Istanbul, and we'll actually see, I'd like people to get a feel for modern Turkey and the last 500,000 years, that type of thing. And so we start in Istanbul, and then we actually travel across the country. And essentially, we go back in time looking at various archaeological sites and piecing them together in this grand story. And the culmination, in many ways, both figuratively and literally, is when we arrive at Göbekli Tepe, which is in southeastern Turkey, at the end of our journey, and we pushed it all the way back, and then we'll be studying Göbekli Tepe, this incredible site from the end of the last ice age.
And that's it's should be an awesome trip. And how much does it cost, and how long does it take?
The trip is about for people joining us, it's 2 weeks. It is, I'm trying to remember the exact dates now.
I'm talking to Egypt.
Let's see, what it,
I'm talking to Egypt. Can I get
it's
back to
the
you?
15th, okay. It's a,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, it's the 15th to 28th of June. So we'll start on the 15th, so it's a 2-week trip, 15th to 28th of June, and the price is $3,980. Not including, you have to get yourself to Istanbul. But once you're there, that's all inclusive, because we put together where it's a complete package that includes hotels, all the travel, all the meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So people, once they're joining us, they are taken care of. Everything is covered, and it's just it's incredible. And we try to make it also very, cost effective, because once you're with us, everything's included. There's not a lot of where you have to buy your lunch, that type of thing. And we all travel together and have a great time. Again, if I could put it in, if people are interested, they should go to my website and they'll see the link for it. And that's www.robertschoch, my name, again spelled Schoch, because I get frustrated. So many people misspell it. But www.robertschoch.com.
Also, audience or future listeners on the recorded video we're doing today, they can contact Alchemy Event for such a trip. We can hook you up with Dr. Schoch or ourselves. We hopefully will plan a trip to join you, Dr. Schoch. And for a third,
that would be wonderful.
Especially Havara also, maybe in the future in Egypt.
Yes, because I'd like to get back there. Like I said, you were asking me about Egypt versus Turkey, and how can I pick one over the other? So, and that's exactly, and I've been telling that. And actually, the last trip, I've had these trips fill up, so people should sign up, because, I can only take so many people with me, because you can't be overburdened. So people, if they're interested, they should sign up. And if they really want the full experience, Turkey, and then in the future, come to Egypt. Because they do complement each other very nicely. But I would say for many people, especially in this time, and Turkey is a wonderful place, and it has these really important sites we've been talking about. Yes, in fact, they have been allowing filming. Initially, when I was studying it, they actually would not allow filming, but in recent years, they've been allowing filming. Now, there's absolutely, I have to say, when you deal with countries like this, you never know how things are going to change. So people can email me and I'll give them the latest up-to-date information. But yes, we've been able to do that. That would be wonderful. That would be a dream. That would be wonderful. We'll have a great time. Oh, thank you. Well,